Shabbat Shalom. So would you believe me if I told you that I was 11 years old? No, probably not. Well, what if I was still in my 20s and clean-shaven like I was for a bit of my 20s? Would you buy it then? Probably not. So why in the world is the Orlando Ballet putting on a production of Peter Pan that is going to star somebody that is not an 11-year-old? Right? The titular character, Peter Pan, is supposed to be a permanent child, usually portrayed somewhere around 10, 11 or so. But I can guarantee you that the ballet star on that stage is not going to be a 10 or 11-year-old. And by the way, if you want to check for yourself, please consider going with Temple Israel, which has a time set aside when we'll be able to attend. So, how do they get away with that? Isn't it just a blatant lie? That's not Peter Pan. Or he's a child who's lived as long as an adult, but is still a child. And as Bernie points out very, very correctly, it's an actor. Do I not know how theater works? When you walk into a stage production, do you actually think that is Macbeth? And those are actual witches that are plotting and all of the scheming? Is there really a dagger before me? No, of course, this is what we call make-believe. And there's a reason why we call it make-believe. Because you have to make yourself believe it. It is what's called in the fancy jargon, willing suspension of disbelief. That just because you are sitting in a room with darkened lights and people on a stage or on a screen, and you are going to deliberately tune all of that out. You're not going to focus on the projector. You're not going to focus on the framing. You're not going to focus on the chintzy costumes or bad set design or whatever might be going on in that particular production. You're going to pretend that's all real. And you're going to pretend when Romeo is dueling that there's a chance he might get hurt and that those swords are actually real and it's not all just planned. Because if we didn't pretend, what would going to the theater or the movies, if you can remember what those experiences were like, what would those be like if we weren't pretending that this was somehow real to some degree? It would be the most insane thing ever. I'm going to go stare at a bunch of people saying words that make no sense whatsoever because it's clearly a bunch of lies and not actually happen. Why am I sitting here watching these lunatics? Why did I pay money to come in? But you choose to accept that it is real for at least the duration of your ticket, and then you can have the excitement, the tension, the passion of what is going on. And that suspension of disbelief is not just important because it allows us to believe that superheroes have powers, that cartoons are actually real, or that any of the things that you see on the stage or in movies has some reality for that hour, 2, 3 hours that you are watching it. But it is also incredibly important when you suspend your disbelief in the opposite of the reality. What I mean is, when you go to see a movie, yes, you have to take that first step to suspend disbelief that this isn't just a bunch of light being shown up on a screen, but that this is actually real in some respect. But there is a larger leap of faith, or disfaith if you wish, to say that what is happening on that screen could turn out wrong. You know what I mean? When you go to see Peter Pan, do you expect Captain Hook to win? No, absolutely not. So why do you feel on the edge of your seat when Peter is dueling Captain Hook? You know he's not going to lose. You know that when you went to see a superhero movie, do you think the credits are going to roll with the superhero dead and the villain laughing as he's taken over the world? Of course not. What kind of movie would that be? The only time they can sort of get away with it, thinking Empire Strikes Back or Infinity War, is if you know that there's a sequel that you are going to go and see, because then it's all going to be made right again. It's going to be all fixed and it will be appropriate. And if there is any loss or tragedy, it will be with the appropriate tragic gravitas, and it'll still feel fulfilling Even if there happen to be a few bodies at the end, it'll be appropriate bodies that were done in the appropriate way, not in some empty, hollow fashion that leaves me wondering why in the world I came to see this. And yet, while watching the movie, we believe it could turn out wrong, or else there would be no tension. There would be no excitement. When you go to see a romantic comedy or sit home and watch one on Netflix these days, you honestly believe for at least part of the film that Harry is not going to actually get together with Sally. Right? Can you watch When Harry Met Sally without knowing that they are going to be together by the end of the movie? It's in the title, people. And yet, for 3/4 of the movie, you're legitimately worried that this relationship isn't going to work out. Really? Of course. Because if we didn't believe that, we wouldn't laugh at the jokes, we wouldn't cry, we wouldn't hope, we wouldn't be able to feel the catharsis when they are together. If we didn't set aside the reality that we know, which is, of course, it's going to work out in the end, we wouldn't be able to enjoy the film. In Judaism, too, unfortunately, many of us treat this world as though it were a movie. I don't just mean we don't take it seriously enough. I don't mean that we're complaining about the set design. But I mean that many of us are under the impression that the conclusion, that the end, that the credit scenes could go badly. Do you honestly think that the director put together this production and at the end, it's all going to be terrible? Do you think that the script that was written for this of creation actually has a bad, non-fulfilling, non-appropriate ending? And yet we act like that's a real possibility. We act like maybe it's all going to fall apart. Maybe everything is going to just explode. A meteor is going to disintegrate our planet and we'll be turned to dust and that'll be it. All it wrote, drop curtain, everyone go home, we're done. That's not why God created the world. The same reason that a director and producer didn't make a movie just to yank the rug out from under you halfway through and send you home wondering why you bothered. God, too, did not create this amazing planet and populate it with humanity just so that it could all be ruined because we were all too stupid to do better. Now, we can make it pretty miserable. We can definitely mess things up, which is why it is appropriate to take seriously the fact that we do have to try to make this the best production possible. But when you are facing despair, understand that eventually it will work out okay. That God would not have set this movie in motion were it not to have a happy resolution, a happy ending. But there's always one little niggling part, at least if you're like me. When you consider from that long-term view, when you step back and you look at the words of our prophets, you look at the words of our Torah, you look at the words of our sages, and you realize that, yes, as bad as today might seem, I know that eventually there will be redemption. Indeed, that's much of what we talked about during the holiday of Pesach. As much as we can believe that, and as much as we can draw solace from that, and draw strength, and indeed our people have for thousands of years, there's still part of me that says, but what about me? What about me? I mean, I know that we say we so much in Judaism that sometimes you think we're French, but you've got to work with me, people. Otherwise, we're not going to have a good production. But that does not mean that Judaism only focuses on the we and the us. Yes, those are the most common pronouns in our primary prayers. But for those of you who have had the discipline and the pleasure of coming early enough for Bechot HaShachar and Pesukei de Zimra, for reading the prayers that come as preparation, you might be surprised to find that the first person pronoun, singular, pervades those sections. It is about I. Who am I? What am I? How do I feel? What is my place? What is my role? How do I relate to my God? Not only to our God. And that reflection of the individual shows that Judaism is sensitive to the feelings of personal doubt, of personal frustration, of personal despair. That we are not only focused on the communal, long-term, historical, impersonal tide of God's creation, but that we do consider the individual as well. Now, we believe the individual finds best expression through the communal, of course, but there is one other thing I would like you to consider, much in keeping with the first portion that we discussed. Do you think God would have cast you in this production if you didn't have a role to play? Do you think that you are an unnecessary background character in what God has made? Do you think that you are of no consequence? God could have chosen to have had anyone other than you exist in your place. Such is the power of God, and such is the power of creation. Anybody but you could currently be sitting here, but they're not. Anybody but you could have been born to your parents, but they weren't. You were cast for this role at this time in this place. Now, you may not know exactly what your part is. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of improv going on in living. But you were chosen to play the role that you have been given. Finding it, defining it, mastering it, yes, that is a lifetime's work. But knowing that you passed the audition, that you were cast in the greatest production of all time, because it literally takes up all time, should fill you with some sense of understanding that your existence is not coincidental, it is not accidental, and it is not inconsequential. Your existence matters, and without you, the show would not be complete. Without you, creation would not be complete. Without you, God would not have had that person fill that very important role. Now, as I said, unfortunately, we are not handed a script when we enter this world. We are handed guidelines. We call them Torah in Judaism. But much of our life is finding what is our role to play. Much of it can be shaped in our relationship with others and our relationship with ourselves. But finding that particular time, that particular way that we will shine on the screen, that we will walk upon the stage, and not be part of sound and fury signifying nothing, but be part of the great tapestry of creation. That is our life's work, our life's mission. And it is something unique to each one of us. So draw strength from the knowledge that all of creation was designed in order that there would be a resolution. And draw strength to realize that you were designed to play your part as well. Find it, embrace it, act as it. And we can all make this a much better production than you can even imagine. Shabbat Shalom.